What you're about to see in this video will change everything you thought you knew about the ocean. It was supposed to be a peaceful morning, quiet waves, overcast skies, and a man seeking calm in the ocean he loved. But just before noon on Christmas Eve, something broke that silence in Morro Bay. A surfer spotted something floating just beyond the break. At first glance, it looked like driftwood, maybe a wetsuit. But as they got closer, the truth surfaced, and it was worse than anyone could imagine. There was no splashing, no cries for help, only a lifeless body, face down in the surf. 42-year-old Tomas Butterfield had vanished beneath the water, and when they pulled him to shore, the horror was undeniable. Massive trauma, deep tears, a pattern only one predator could leave behind. A great white shark had struck without warning. But how did it happen so fast? Why was he alone? And what made that morning, of all days, so deadly? This is the story of a man's final ride and the apex predator that ended it in seconds. Welcome to the Animal Quest channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more real-life animal encounter documentaries. Tomas Abraham Butterfield wasn't someone you'd expect to make national headlines. At 42 years old, he lived a quiet life in Sacramento, California, steady, reflective, and grounded. He worked hard, kept to himself, and always made time for his family. The ocean had always been a place of peace for him, not for adrenaline, not for conquest, just peace. Every year, he made the trip to Morro Bay. It was a place that felt untouched, where the crashing surf met rocky cliffs and gray fog blanketed the mornings like a secret. He loved it here. Locals say he was always respectful in the water, never aggressive. Tomas didn't chase the biggest waves. He paddled out to clear his mind. On the morning of December 24th, 2021, Tomas arrived at the beach just after 10:30 a.m. His car was found parked near Morro Strand State Beach, a familiar stretch of shoreline he had visited many times before. He wasn't with friends. He didn't tell anyone he was going in. With his fins on and bodyboard in hand, he stepped into the water, likely thinking of nothing more than the rhythm of the sea. It was the kind of gray, overcast morning that made the waves look like moving slate. He paddled out alone. There were no warnings that day, no closures, no sign of danger. The ocean at first glance was calm, but something was already in motion beneath him, something silent, fast and fatal. Just minutes later, his body would be found floating face down, barely visible in the surf, and the town of Morro Bay would be rocked by a kind of horror it hadn't seen in decades. The question that haunted everyone was simple: what happened out there? And how did a peaceful man's final holiday morning turn into one of California's most disturbing shark attacks in years? The answers would come soon, delivered not through video or eyewitnesses, but through the wounds. The morning of December 24th, 2021, began like any other in Morro Bay. Fog drifting across the bluffs, the distant cry of gulls, and the rhythmic pulse of the Pacific pushing gently against the shore. According to NOAA's marine observations from the Point Piedras Blancas buoy, sea temperatures hovered near 54 degrees Fahrenheit, chilly but stable. The skies were overcast, winds calm, and visibility limited by the thick marine layer. There were no storm warnings, no reports of unusual marine life, nothing to suggest that the ocean would turn deadly. By 10 a.m., a few local surfers had already paddled out along the northern stretch of Morro Strand State Beach. It was low tide, which exposed a longer stretch of beach and made the waves easier to catch for those less experienced. That's likely why Tomas chose this spot. It wasn't known for aggressive surf, and the lineup that morning was light, just a handful of people out. Tomas slipped into the water unnoticed. He wasn't loud or flashy. He rarely even talked much when he was at the beach. He preferred to observe, to quietly float, breathe, and let the sea wash away the noise of the world. He was last seen heading out with his bodyboard near the Atascadero Road access point, sometime between 10:30 and 10:40 a.m. No one saw the strike. There were no screams, no splashing, no commotion in the water to warn those nearby. Whatever happened, it happened fast, and it happened just below the surface. Investigators would soon discover more, and what they found would only deepen the nightmare. Witnesses didn't hear screams. There was no thrashing, only a moment of silence, and then a floating board. At 10:48 a.m., a surfer navigating the outer break near the mouth of Morro Creek caught sight of something in the water. It wasn't moving. It wasn't reacting to the waves. It was drifting, unnaturally. As he paddled closer, he realized it wasn't just a piece of gear. It was a body, face down, lifeless. The board still attached by a leash to one ankle. Tomas Butterfield had been pulled under and released. His body returned by the ocean, but altered forever. The surfer signaled for help, and within minutes, emergency crews were racing down Atascadero Road toward the beach access. By 11 a.m., the area had been closed off. First responders carefully pulled Tomas from the water. He was unresponsive, pale, his wetsuit shredded from the left shoulder down to the lower back. The trauma was immense. A single arc-like tear stretched across his torso, deep enough to expose bone, wide enough to suggest an enormous bite radius. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle, just a clean, monstrous rupture consistent with one sudden and overwhelming strike. At 1:15 p.m., the San Luis Obispo County Coroner's Office took custody of the body. An autopsy was performed within 48 hours. The findings were clear and devastating. Tomas Butterfield died from blunt force trauma with massive tissue loss. The bite was so powerful, so catastrophic, that death likely occurred within minutes, if not seconds. The extent of his injuries suggested an upward strike from below, a tactic used by one apex predator known for stealth and violence, the great white shark. California Fish and Wildlife investigators reviewed the case alongside marine biologists, using photos, wound patterns, and bite radius measurements to estimate the size of the animal. The conclusion was chilling. The shark was likely over 12 feet in length, possibly larger. It hadn't lingered. It hadn't fed. The bite appeared to be investigative, a tragic case of mistaken identity. Tomas, riding low in the water on his bodyboard with black fins, may have resembled a seal from below, a fatal illusion. There were no second chances, no opportunity to cry out. The strike came from beneath, with speed and force few humans could survive. The ocean had taken him in a matter of moments, but as authorities raced to confirm what kind of shark was responsible, another question emerged, one even harder to answer. Why here, in this quiet part of California? And why now, just hours before Christmas? Morro Bay hadn't seen a fatal shark attack in decades, not in living memory. For locals, the sea was a neighbor, sometimes wild but never lethal. The news of Tomas Butterfield's death spread through the community like a rip current, silent, fast, and deeply unsettling. By the afternoon of December 24th, emergency vehicles lined the sand. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the coastal wind. The San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office announced that Morro Strand State Beach would be temporarily closed to the public as a precaution. Lifeguards, California State Parks rangers, and fish and wildlife officers began patrolling nearby waters, searching for any sign of the predator that had struck so suddenly. News crews arrived just before sunset. Local residents gathered at the beach access, staring silently at the water, as if trying to understand how something so brutal could happen beneath such calm waves. Tomas had been one of them, a visitor, yes, but also a fellow Californian, a man who loved the ocean in the same quiet way many of them did. "It's a tragic reminder of how wild this coastline really is," said Morro Bay Harbor Director Eric Endersby in a public statement. "We share the ocean with incredible creatures, and sometimes those encounters turn dangerous." His voice, like many others that day, was shaken. Marine biologists from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife were quick to weigh in. Based on recent NOAA tracking data and satellite-tagged shark patterns, great white sharks are known to migrate south along the California coast during winter months, often passing through central regions like Morro Bay between December and February. Juveniles typically remain in southern waters, but larger adults, measuring 10 feet or more, sometimes venture closer to shore, especially near feeding grounds rich in sea lions and elephant seals. But attacks like this, they're rare, Incredibly rare. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife reported only a handful of unprovoked shark attacks statewide each year, most of them non-fatal. In fact, between 1950 and 2021, only a few fatal shark attacks had ever occurred in San Luis Obispo County. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was an anomaly. Still, the evidence was irrefutable. The size and severity of the wound, the nature of the trauma, and the single fatal strike all pointed to one creature, a great white. By nightfall, the beach was empty, just a wall of fog rolling in the rhythmic churn of the sea as it kept its secrets buried beneath the surface. But for the investigators and the family left behind, the most difficult questions were still ahead. Because if Tomas was mistaken for prey, what else could be mistaken next? Why did the shark strike? That was the question no one could shake. Not the family grieving in Sacramento, not the biologists scouring tide patterns and feeding charts, and not the people of Morro Bay, who now looked at their ocean with a fear that hadn't existed the day before. The answer, experts said, lay in the way great white sharks hunt. Unlike the dramatic thrashing seen in movies, a great white's attack is swift, calculated, and nearly invisible until the final second. These apex predators often stalk from below, using the ocean's murky depths as cover. They are ambush hunters, relying on stealth, speed, and overwhelming force. When a shark decides to strike, it launches from the deep at speeds nearing 25 miles per hour, jaws wide, eyes rolled back, propelled by centuries of evolution, perfected for one thing: killing. In Tomas Butterfield's case, the evidence painted a tragically clear picture. The shape of the wound, the depth of the tissue trauma, and the dimensions of the bite radius were consistent with a great white measuring at least 10 to 12 feet in length. Not a juvenile, a full-grown adult. According to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Shark Lab at California State University, Long Beach December marks the seasonal migration of adult great whites along the Central Coast. As they move south in search of food, they often pass close to shallow coastal waters, especially near seal populations. And to a shark, a bodyboarder wearing black fins and a dark wetsuit, moving low and slow in the water, can resemble the silhouette of a seal. But this wasn't a feeding event. No tissue was removed, no signs of consumption. Tomas had been struck once and left. Dr. Chris Lowe, director of the Shark Lab, has explained this pattern before. It's often an exploratory bite, he said in past interviews. The shark uses its mouth the way we use our hands. They make a decision very quickly after the first strike. If it's not prey, they usually swim off. But for a human, even one bite is often fatal. It was a case of mistaken identity, with irreversible consequences. Experts emphasize just how rare these attacks are. Statistically, the odds of being killed by a shark in U.S. waters are less than 1 in 3.7 million. Yet here on a quiet morning in Morro Bay, that rare outcome became reality. And still, no one saw the shark. No fin, no wake, no second appearance. It came, it struck, and it vanished. What drove it to that exact moment, that exact man, remains impossible to know. But the sea has never offered answers, only silence. And for Tomas Butterfield's family, that silence was just beginning. He likely never saw it coming. There was no chance to react, no instinctive kick, no desperate cry for help. Experts concluded that the force of the strike was so sudden, so catastrophic, that Tomas Butterfield may have lost consciousness instantly. The blunt trauma alone, deep within the torso, was enough to stop the heart. The shark's massive jaws, filled with rows of serrated teeth, had cut through muscle and bone in a single, crushing arc. According to the San Luis Obispo County coroner's report, the severity of the wound left no room for survival. The water around him would have turned dark in seconds, mixed with the cold Pacific and something far more final. And then, silence. The board floated gently at the surface, still tethered to his ankle. His body, lifeless, drifted back toward shore. And the shark, whatever it was, however large, was already gone. No one saw it before. No one saw it after. Tomas died alone, in the ocean he trusted, an ocean he had visited again and again to escape the noise of everyday life. His last moments were spent surrounded by the thing he loved most, and yet, the timing couldn't have been more cruel. It was Christmas Eve, a day meant for family, a day meant for comfort, laughter, tradition. Somewhere less than 2 miles away, Tomas's relatives were preparing for the holiday, not knowing that just beyond the fog and waves, their son, brother, and friend had slipped beneath the surface, never to return the same. No one should have to receive that kind of call, not on any day, but especially not on the night before Christmas. The coroner's office reached out just after sunset. Identification was confirmed by the contents of his car: keys, ID, wallet. The official cause of death would take days, but by then, his family already knew. They hadn't lost Tomas to a storm or an accident. They had lost him to something unimaginable: a single moment, a single mistake, and a single bite. But the ocean had one more revelation to give, one final haunting detail no one expected. The news traveled quietly at first. A breaking report from Morro Bay: bodyboarder killed in a rare shark attack on Christmas Eve. But for those who knew Tomas Butterfield, it wasn't just a headline. It was the beginning of a nightmare. His sister, devastated, asked for privacy, but close friends stepped forward, offering glimpses into the life that had been lost. Tomas was described as soft-spoken, deeply introspective, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. He didn't chase crowds. He chased solitude, the kind you only find in nature. And the ocean had always been his place of peace. He'd moved from Sacramento to Morro Bay years earlier, drawn by its quiet charm and the cold, wild waves of the Central Coast. Locals remembered seeing him in the early mornings, board under his arm, walking barefoot toward the surf with a calm kind of purpose. And then, just like that, he was gone. In the days that followed, the shoreline became a place of mourning. Flowers appeared at the dunes near the rock. Candles flickered at sunset. Strangers, many who had never met Tomas, left notes tucked under smooth stones. "You were one of us. You mattered. You are remembered." A GoFundMe was launched quietly without press. It wasn't for headlines. It was for healing. Friends and family hoped it might cover memorial costs, travel, time off work. But more than that, it was a gesture of love, an attempt to ease a pain that couldn't be named. There is no video of the attack, no final image to study, analyze, or replay. And maybe that's for the best, because this isn't a story about death. It's a story about a life, about a man who walked into the ocean one last time, not knowing what waited beneath. Authorities closed the beach for 24 hours. Experts from California's Department of Fish and Wildlife confirmed the culprit was almost certainly a great white shark, estimated to be between 15 and 20 feet long, a perfect predator, acting not out of malice but instinct. Still, for those left behind, explanations don't ease the grief. And in the wake of it all, one question lingered in the salty air. Why him? Why now? But the ocean never answers. It only takes. And on that cold, gray evening in Morro Bay, it had taken everything. Shark attacks are still rare. Even along California's rugged coast, most beachgoers will never see a dorsal fin, never hear the chilling splash behind them. But the ocean is never without risk. Tomas Butterfield knew the water. He respected it. But on December 24th, 2021, that deep respect met an ancient predator, and the result was irreversible. No warnings, no cries for help. Just one final moment, and then silence. This was his last ride, and though his story ends in tragedy, his memory now rides with every wave that crashes along Morro Bay. Every flicker of candlelight left in the sand. Every quiet moment surfers glance over their shoulder, knowing that out there, somewhere, a great white still waits. If you found this story important, please like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life animal survival and attack documentaries. And remember, always respect the wild.